I will say to everyone, hello and good evening. Welcome to the second season of Literature Berks. I'm Nancy Russo from the Exeter Community Library, and I am a partner and co-chair of Literature Berks with Amanda Hornberger, who usually does this. So I'll try to step in and do, I don't know, a little bit of a good job. I won't really fill her shoes. Literature Berks is in its second season, and it's a celebration of books and authors presented by the Jewish Federation of Reading in partnership with our library and the Jewish Book Council. In the chat, you can see a link to purchase a signed copy of We Came Here to Shine through our official book vendor, Reeds & Company Bookshop. We're happy to support a local independent bookstore and encourage you to shop local during this time. And as ever, books make great gifts, especially for mom on Mother's Day. Throughout the event, please feel free to type any questions you may have into the chat. We'll do our best to answer any questions throughout the program. Susie Orman Schnall is the award-winning author of the novels We Came Here to Shine, The Subway Girls, a particular favorite at our library, The Balance Project, and On Grace. Her writing has appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, HuffPost, Pop Sugar, Writer's Digest, Harper's Bazaar, and Glamour. And she is also a frequent speaker at women's groups, corporations, libraries, bookstores, and book clubs. Susie grew up in Los Angeles, graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, and now lives in New York with her husband and their 3 teenage sons. I'm honored to welcome Susie to Literature Berks.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I appreciate that. Is someone admitting people? Because I just admitted
Yes.
Courtney. Okay, someone's doing that. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, Amanda and Nancy and everybody with the organization. It is such a joy for me to speak to organizations about my book, We Came Here to Shine, although I have to say that this whole book tour that I've done since my book came out last summer has been virtual, so I definitely miss getting to talk to people in person. But there definitely are advantages to the Zoom talks. So I appreciate your having me, and I'm looking forward to talking about the book and answering any questions that you may have. So Nancy, you want to start with questions or?
All right. Well, I do, let me admit someone before I do that. Okay. First of all, I have to ask, why the World's Fair as a setting?
So I found out about, I really went into the World's Fair backwards through the Aquacade. So let me ask you a question. Not everybody has read the book, so I shouldn't do any spoilers, right? Okay. Right. There will be no spoilers, I promise.
Okay.
So the Aquacade is one of the main settings of this book. So I found out about the Aquacade, which I'll explain to you in a second, while reading this book, which I'm sorry, I forgot to not make my screen backwards, but this is The $1 Million Mermaid by Esther Williams. And this is her autobiography. And it is so juicy and so good. And so if anybody's interested in that time period of, the middle of the last century, women in entertainment, she really gives a lot of good gossip and shows receipts, as the young kids say today. And it's really, really good. And so I was reading it, and she starts talking about how in the summer of 1940, she swam in Billy Rose's Aquacade in the 1940 Golden Gate Exposition, which was the World's Fair in San Francisco. And I read that passage and I thought, Aquacade? What's an Aquacade? I'd never heard that word before.
Yeah,
so
I never did either.
I went on Google, as we do, and I looked up Billy Rose's Aquacade, and I learned that the Aquacade was a synchronized swimming spectacular and the highest grossing attraction at the 1939 New York World's Fair. It had begun in St. Louis, but it didn't really take off until Billy Rose brought it to New York City in 1939. And I started reading about it and how it was this multi-million-dollar technologically advanced production, and there were 100 swimmers and 100 dancers. and set design by famous people and costume design and choreography. And I just was smitten with it. And I thought it would be so fascinating to plop a character down in that world and write a book about it. So in order to do that, as I said, I stepped back and I said, well, where was this aquacade, the 1939 New York World's Fair? And when I started reading about the World's Fair and what a monumental event that was, not only because it was right at the end of the Depression and right at the beginning of World War II. I mean, the timing was really sandwiched in a very small window from one world disaster to a next, but it also was the site of unbelievable technological introductions, the television, the nylon stockings. There were so many things, the color television, I should say, in live broadcast. There were so many things that were new and advanced. The theme of the World's Fair was the world of tomorrow. And I was captivated by it. I just thought it was really fascinating. And I thought, if I'm fascinated by it, then other people might be too.
It's interesting that you were mentioning all of the technological advances, because I'm a big Disney buff, and there was an interesting program about what they did at that World's Fair and how some of the exhibits in, I believe it's Epcot, ended up at Disney. So
yes, so Walt Disney was inspired by the New York World's Fair because of the way, I'll tell you about that in a second. And that's what was the inspiration for Epcot. He thought, why is there a World's Fair in different places that you have to go and it's not permanent? Why can't we build a World's Fair? And that was the inspiration for Epcot, which is really, really cool. And one of the interesting things about the World's Fair, and I have so many things to tell you, but it was the first World's Fair that was divided into zones to make it more easily navigable by the attendees. And one of the zones was the government zone. And that's where there were about 60 countries and I think about 35 US states. They didn't all come because it was very expensive to put on a pavilion. But and Russia was the first country that signed up. Interestingly enough, FDR himself went around and wooed countries to participate. But so it was really this, it was a really prominent part of the fair, and all the countries were there together. So it made that much more of an impression on Walt Disney.
Wow. What drew you to create two strong female characters? I mean, I'm drawn to reading books about that. Did you draw from family or friends?
It's just kind of my favorite topic. I'm fascinated by ambitious women. I was not necessarily raised by very bold women or very ambitious women. And so it's kind of a thing that I looked on almost as an exotic animal. These women who were brave and bold and didn't follow the rules. And I've always been mesmerized by what was it about these women that allowed them to be that way, especially in the past, in times where absolutely everything was stacked up against these women, to be able to overcome the challenges present in school and in work and in society in general, right? So from my very first book, my first two novels were contemporary fiction. And it wasn't until I wrote The Subway Girls, which was my third novel, and We Came Here to Shine, that I started writing historical fiction. But I just always like to explore. It's almost like I get to put their skin on for a little bit and be them. And say the things that I never said. I like to say that in The Subway Girls, which was my novel about the Miss Subways contest, which took place in the New York City subway system from 1941 to 1976. That book was dual storyline. It was set in 1949 with the Miss Subways contest, and then there was a modern day storyline. And my character in the modern day sleeps with her boss and breaks all the rules and shows up to meetings that she wasn't invited to. And I never did those things in my 20s and 30s when I worked in corporate America. So I got to do them through her. So yes, I am fascinated by ambitious women. And I always like to say that my characters are the same age as Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Either this book or the Subway Girls. I don't remember what year she was born in, but there are women who against all odds somehow became Supreme Court justices. And I just like to explore what that was about them.
With Vivi and Max had very different ways of responding to challenges and criticisms and offer to help each other. What did they learn from one another? And why did you focus on ways that the women could help each other versus the competition that sometimes arises between women?
Yeah. Well, I wanted them to be who they were in service to the story, right? So I knew that I wanted the story to focus on these women, but in this World's Fair environment, and having them be ambitious to overcome the restrictions that were placed upon them in their work lives. And I guess I was going to say, I always think it's more fun to see people work together and accomplish things, but I guess some people like seeing people, cat fights. That's what reality television is entirely about these days, right? But I didn't want to live in that energy for the time it would take to create the book and talk about the book. So I thought it would be more fun. And I do have them, they are at odds. They do conflict with each other at some point and have to resolve those differences to realize that they're going to be stronger together. But one of the reasons that I had two characters in the first place was to show how two different people dealt with the challenges that women confronted in that time period. And that's also why I love writing about that time period and why the Subway Girls was dual storyline, to show what has changed since the 1930s and 1940s in America and what has stayed the same, because so much has stayed the same. And it's interesting to see the patterns that we haven't fully gotten out of yet, much to our detriment. But I really loved that they had different approaches. Max is my character. So Vivi is the character who swims in the aquacade. She comes from Hollywood. She's about to, in the very first chapter, so this isn't giving anything away. In the very first chapter, she's about to start the first day of filming of her first major Hollywood role. And something happens and she ends up going to New York to swim the lead in the aquacade. My second main character is Max. And you can think of Vivi as kind of like an Esther Williams type look. Max is my second character, and she is a journalist. She goes to journalism. She's in college at NYU, and she's in this very prestigious cohort of students who are chosen to be in this summer program where they're placed by their professor at an internship. And all Max wants to do is work at the New York Times. But instead, her professor, again, this is the first chapter, her professor places her at the World's Fair newspaper, which is called Today at the Fair. And you can picture Max as a Katharine Hepburn, Emma Stone type, very plucky, very bold, very brash, would never wear a skirt, always showed up in pants. And it's just fun to watch the two of them meet and become friends and overcome their challenges together.
There are some questions in the chat, and one is going to bring us back to the World's Fair.
Okay, great.
With World War II starting that fall, what happened to the World's Fair? Did it have a second season?
So the World's Fair was designed to only be around for 1 year, for the summer of 1939. And all of these countries and companies and organizations built really expensive pavilions and buildings that were only meant to be up for a year, which is crazy to me. They broke ground in 1936 and the fair opened on on Friday was the 82nd year anniversary of the opening of the World's Fair. But what happened, and it was supposed to run through October of 1939, but what happened is the attendance numbers were lower than the fair organization had anticipated. for a variety of reasons. Some people thought that the ticket prices were too high, especially in light of the Depression. It was very expensive for a typical family to go. Number two, there was some bad weather at the beginning of the summer. And number three, some people thought that it was a little bit too highbrow, that the midway wasn't raunchy enough. So there were some complaints, although millions of people went and absolutely loved it, and it got rave reviews. So in the middle of the summer, the Fair Corporation, which was the organization in charge of the fair, run by a man named Grover Whalen, they decided to extend the fair into the summer of 1940. So the fair did last for 2 years. Not every exhibitor stayed. In fact, some of the countries didn't have the resources anymore to maintain their pavilions, so they left. And the amusement zone, excuse me, became a little bit lower brow. They brought in more rides and midway things to change it. But yeah, it was only meant for 2 years, and the war definitely put a damper on it.
Where did they actually put the aquacade in the World's Fair? Should we maybe talk about the map that you included in the book so that everyone has a little idea? I'm not sure everyone's been up to.
Okay, let me share my screen, and I'm going to show you a couple pictures. This is the government zone. This is one postcard, and that center lake is called the Lagoon of Nations. But you can see, how big these buildings were, and really full-scale buildings. So this is Vivi. These were my inspiration shots for Vivi, the aquacade swimmer. This is Max, my journalist. Okay, so this is the aquacade. So you can see how big it is. It sat 10,000 spectators for 4 shows a day. And I think it was 25 cents or 40 cents a ticket. And so you can see that the pool, I think, was 300 feet long. And at either end, there were those diving towers. So you can see the one on the left. There's an identical one on the right. And on the main level, you can see that's an orchestra. And on the other side was a glee club. And then above, you can see the diving boards, the diving platforms that professional divers dove off of. So this was centered in the amusement zone of the World's Fair. It was divided into 7 zones, and this was in the amusement zone backing up to a lake. I'll talk about my research in a second. So this was the site of the World's Fair before it became the World's Fair. This was the site identified by the city of New York to have it be held at, and it was an ash heap. And F. Scott Fitzgerald, you can read that quote down there. He wrote not very favorably about this site in The Great Gatsby, but they had to clear and do a lot of remediation to get rid of the ashes that had been dumped there. It was a smelly area with a river. This was groundbreaking in 1936 when they started building. This was it under construction, and you can see it's enormous. It's 1,216 acres. And for comparison, the Magic Kingdom at Disney is about 100 acres. Or Disneyland in Anaheim is about 100 acres. So this is 12 times the size of that. It's just massive. And in the center of this slide, you can see those steel structures being built. That was the Trilon and the Perisphere that are the 2 main, just as the Eiffel Tower was in Paris, the Trilon and the Perisphere were the 2 main architectural icons of the fair, and they made up what they referred to as the theme center, straight in the middle. And in this picture, all the way to the left is where the aquacade was. So you can see there's a little bridge that goes over a highway, and it looks like a clover shape. That's the site of the aquacade that abutted that lake that you can see. And I'll show you another view. This is the Trilon and the Perisphere while they were being built. And this is from the opposite angle, so I'm sorry to confuse you, but this is the fair once it was built. So the Trilon and the Perisphere are now fully built. They were swathed in white kind of panels in the middle. And now the aquacade is off to the right. So satelliting forward, you can see it around 2 o'clock from the Trilon and Perisphere was what they called Constitution Mall that led to the government zone. So it was really magnificent and just a beautiful, beautiful site. This is FDR himself opening the fair on April 30th, 1939. You can see Eleanor there at the bottom right, looking quite Eleanorish. And this is a map of the World's Fair. This was in a book that I read. And you can see that the different zones are color coordinated. So at the very bottom is the automotive zone. And then the theme center, as I mentioned, is white in the very, very middle. There's the food zone, the community interest zone, the production and distribution zone, the government zone. And then off to the right, everything in yellow is the amusement zone. And there you can see right to the left of the F in Fountain Lake is it says amphitheater, that was the Aquacade. This is another map that was given out in copies of the New Yorker magazine. And I love this map. I think it's so cool. And one of the things as I was writing the book, I don't know, Nancy, if you wanted me to talk about the map in the book.
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I don't know about you all, but I love when there's a map in a book. And I refer to the map all the time, especially obviously when the story of a book is so much consumed with setting. And I knew that I wanted to include a map in my book. But a lot of the maps were like this, which is pretty unattractive, or like this, which is so busy that if it were shrunk to the size of a novel, you wouldn't be able to read it. There are hundreds of buildings. And I knew that I only really needed to highlight the places that my characters went to in the book. So I decided to commission a map, an illustrator to create a custom map for the book and place it at the beginning of the book. And this is the map that we came up with that's now in the front. I'll show you of the book, not in color, but it's in the book. So as readers are reading along, they can say, oh, that's where the Aquacade is, and oh, that's where Max worked in the administration building, and this is how far that was, and then they went to the Italian pavilion, and that's where that was. And readers have told me that they really enjoyed being able to visualize that. So that was really fun, and I really, really enjoyed working with this map designer. Actually, not even a map designer, she's an illustrator. She lives in Milan, Italy, so everything was done over email. I would send her actual photographs of the buildings and tell her which buildings were important, and she came up with an entire wayfinding strategy, which you have to do for maps. And she ended up coming to New York for business at one point, and we got to meet, but I thought she did a fantastic, fantastic job with that.
Great, thank you. What's really amazing to me is that if you drive along the Grand Central Parkway now, you can still see some of the landmarks of the 1939 World's Fair. So
Actually, I'm going to correct you there. So that's
okay.
the 1964-65.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. So right near, some people might know, right near LaGuardia Airport, right at the site where the Arthur Ashe Tennis Stadium is, where the U.S. Open is played, and near, I was going to say Shea Stadium. It's now.
I don't know. Is it
Citi Field?
Yes.
Is the site of the New York World's Fair, and so everything was torn down in 1940 except for two things: the Aquacade, which became a public swimming pool, and then eventually in the 70s, I think it was, or the 90s, it was torn down because of the asbestos. And the other building that remained and still remains to this day was what was called the New York Building. And that eventually became the site, the first site of the United Nations. It was the very first place that the United Nations assembled. And then it became an ice skating rink where my husband actually skated when he was a little boy. Okay. And now it is the Queen's Museum, and it's a wonderful museum. They have a lot of memorabilia from the World's Fairs. But in 1964 and 1965, the World's Fair came back to New York. And so the big, it's called the Unisphere, the big globe that you see from the side of the road, is there from 64, 65. And then there's this other platform thing, I forget what it's called, but that's also from 64, 65 and was in Men in Black, I think is the movie. But it's Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, Queens. And you can still walk the footprint of the fair, which is really neat. It's a public park now.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I have to go there, and thank you for correcting that. Thank you. Um, Someone wants to know about your wonderful books behind you, and we were talking about that before we started. Who are your favorite authors? What do you like to read for pleasure? And let's see, do you mostly read for your research? Lisa is commenting also, the books on your shelf look like they are color coded. It looks beautiful. Just curious about that. Thank you.
Okay, I hope I can get all those questions. Yes, this shelf, which so this is my office that I'm sitting in. Downstairs in my husband's office are most of my books, but the books directly behind me are the books that I've read and that are some of either my favorites that I don't want to banish downstairs, or that I refer to because I think they're I'm inspired by the voice. So when I'm writing and sometimes I'm like, I'm stuck, I'll just open a book and read a few pages of a book that I was inspired by for whatever reason. So this shelf, yes, is color coordinated. I was telling Nancy and Amanda at the beginning that I kept seeing those pictures that people would post on Instagram of their color coordinated shelves. And I thought, okay, I'll try it with one shelf. And now I couldn't do it for anywhere else in my house because I like to be able to find books and I do it by last name. So this shelf above that is my shelf of books that I'm waiting to read, as are this pile right here. And there's like, you can only see one of those piles. There's like 4 piles. So I have a lot. I love to read books, and there are so many books that I want to read that I just don't get around to. My favorite books to read are historical fiction. I love to learn something while I'm reading. I'm really not great at reading World War II books anymore. I've kind of reached my peak limit, even though they're wonderful and there are so many incredible books about World War II. I'm a little bit spent on that. I also love domestic thrillers, domestic suspense, like Ruth Ware or Julie Clark, books that are just page turners, that aren't horror and aren't, really gruesome or anything like that, but books like that. I love some nonfiction. I love memoirs. I actually post on my Instagram every time I read a book. So I will say a few things. Number one, my most favorite book that I've recently listened to is The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna, which was so magnificent. And the narrator, an actress named Julia Whalen, reads The Four Winds, and she does such a magnificent job. Same thing with the book called This Is How It Always Is by Lori Frankel. I think that's the author. Also a magnificent audiobook. I'm listening to Trevor Noah's book right now, and I'm reading a manuscript that my author friend Linda Cohen Loigman wrote, which many of you may have read her books, The Two-Family House or The Wartime Sisters. She's got another book coming out next year, which you should definitely host for Jewish Book Council. But I read in a lot of different genres. I don't tend to read a lot of history nonfiction. I just like to turn a page. And I also don't read a lot of literary fiction, which is the real high-end literature, because I like to keep the pages turning. And so I miss out on a lot of beautiful writing, but I really like to be entertained and read good stories. Some of my favorite books are, oh gosh, there's just so many. I'll have to send you a list. I can't even think of them off the top of my head.
Yeah, I actually agree with you about literary fiction. I don't like that genre.
Yeah, it's not for me.
No, it's I think it's too highbrow.
Yeah, I'm certainly impressed by it because I could never write like that, but yeah, not for me.
Yeah, I read to be entertained too,
Yeah.
and I like to learn as well. And
Yeah.
and I did learn a lot, and I learned more from talking to you tonight. Actually, Sue has a question. She noticed that the book felt like there was a sequel in the works. So she's wondering if there are more stories about Max and Vivi coming.
Wow, that's really cool. not to embarrass Sue, but I would love to hear what she had in mind and why she felt that
That's all
way.
I got.
That's so interesting. Okay. So no, I'm not planning on writing a sequel, although thank you. That's so kind of you to say. I actually, but to answer the question in a different way, which might be fun for you. So this book actually got optioned for film, and the company that optioned it, the production company, asked me to write the screenplay. So that's what I've been working on for the last 6 months, is taking this book and adapting it to film, which is a completely, as obviously, as you know, a very different medium and a very different animal and discipline. And so I had to revamp the story a great deal. And I won't tell you how for the people who are on here who haven't had a chance to read it yet. I don't want to spoil anything, but I had to basically, because the book is about 350 pages and a screenplay is about 100 pages or 90 pages. A fun fact is that every page of a script equals 1 minute on screen. So if you think of a typical movie of 90 minutes, your screenplay should be around 90 pages. And so, and if you think of those pages and what it looks like on a script, there's a lot of white space and it's mostly just dialogue and some action slug lines and all that. So I really had to distill the story down to what the story was about, which is Max and Vivi's friendship and kind of how they overcome the patriarchy, to simplify it. And so I had to lose a lot of characters. I had to combine a lot of characters, and it was really, really interesting. So that is now with a production company. The script is done to the extent that I've worked on it through all of its revisions, and fingers crossed, you can see it on Netflix one day, but
Wow.
who
Okay.
knows?
Actually, someone else had a question about that. Like, it seems like such a visual book, and it certainly would, I think, make a great Netflix show.
Thank you. And you know, it's interesting because I'm somebody who plots and outlines, and I'm sure as you've listened to all of the authors that you've had in your series, and I was commenting earlier that I've such a wonderful lineup you've all had. I don't know if you've spent time talking to them about their processes, but most authors fall into the camp of either plotters or pantsers. So the plotters are, you know, you outline the book and you kind of know, some people very specifically, some people more broadly, you kind of know what's going to happen at the beginning, the middle, and the end. Whereas pantsers are, they fly by the seat of their pants. They say, okay, I'm going to write a story about two women at the World's Fair, go. That is not me. I don't know how that works, but that is not me. That being said, I throw my outline out halfway through the book because once I start writing, things change and I get new ideas. But the writing book that I like the most, the writing guide that I use, because whereas novels are creative works of fiction, they're not formulaic, they follow a pattern. There is a beginning, a middle, and end. There is an inciting incident that kicks it off, that thrusts the main character onto a journey that he or she cannot return back to his or her normal life. And then they hit the highest highs and the lowest lows, and there's a conflict and a resolution. So for commercial fiction, that's what readers want, and that's what authors have to deliver to keep the pacing. That's a very cinematic way to approach a book. And so the book that I like the most happens to be a writing for film book. And so I found it interesting when people said that they saw this book as very cinematic because it basically is written in the structure of a movie. So when I adapted it, I was able to kind of, you know, separate the wheat from the chaff and just keep the same structure in a way, but make it for film. So I don't know if that made any sense at all, but thank you.
Another question, this is from Courtney. She's very excited to read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. She's heard amazing things about the book, and she sees it behind you on your read shelf.
Yes, and I know it's green. That's the thing. It's so funny because I now know my books by what color their jackets are. So The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid is amazing, as is Daisy Jones and the Six, which is Taylor's the book that came after Evelyn Hugo. Both of them two of the best. And Taylor's book, Malibu Rising, comes out, I think it's June 1st. I think I may
I saw that on
my brain.
Instagram,
But
yeah.
highly, highly, highly recommend Taylor Jenkins Reid. She has quite a knack for, and Daisy Jones is going to be a television series
Oh,
with Hello Sunshine. Yeah.
okay. We always joke at the library that sometimes people call us on the phone and say, oh, there's a book I saw and it had a green cover or a pink cover or whatever. So you're just reinforcing that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. But
It's like a quiz. You're like, okay, what color? Find small, great things. Okay. Oh, I was wrong. I thought it was.
okay,
Yeah,
I think
you
I
get the
see
point.
the nest is
Yeah.
okay. That's the only one I can really make out.
Yeah.
It's a little blurry, but a question from Carol. Are you working on a new book or do you have an idea for the next novel after you're done with the screenplay, of course?
So, okay, so this is, okay, thank you for asking. So I wrote the screenplay and I really, really liked the producing partner that I was working with. He's a writer and producer out in LA. And I had an idea for the book I wanted to write next. And I pitched it to my literary agent and she loved it. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought I would wanted to write it as a television show, as a limited, not as a limited series, as a television show. And so I worked with my producing partner on it and I wrote the pilot for this original television show, which I mean, loosely, it's based in 1950s in the citriculture, the citrus industry of Southern California, at the very beginning of the labor movement of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. So there's a lot of different legs to it. There's the advertising industry at the time, which was really innovative when it came to citriculture. There's the opening of Disney at that time, which opened in 1954, I think it was. There's all the development that took out all the orchards. So I wrote that pilot and have been working on that. And that's also being shopped right now too. And it's funny because I have a lot of ideas for new books and I email them to myself all the time. And so every time I finish a project, I go to my email file of new ideas and I look through them and something will strike. And so something did strike and I said, okay, this is what I want to write about. And I pitched it to my literary agent and she said, okay, great, go for it. And I did all the plotting and brainstorming and some research and I started to write it and I just couldn't write it. I thought to write a book is so many words. It's too hard. You have to write everything that characters feel and see. And so now I think I might write that as a script too. So I think I am a broken novelist and I've been spoiled by the much different and faster and shorter genres, of script writing, which you don't have to write every single thing the characters feel. That's acting. So so the answer to that is I don't know really what's next and still have things in the fire with those two other scripts that I wrote.
Okay. One of the opening quotes of your book is by Eleanor Roosevelt. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. Obviously, it's personal for you. Is that why you chose that quote?
So it's funny because I actually have two quotes on my quote page. I know you can't see it. And the first one is from FDR, and it says, this was his speech when he opened the World Fair. The time has come for me to announce with solemnity, perhaps, but with great happiness, dedicate the World Fair, blah, blah, blah. I hereby declare it open to all mankind. So that was my quote that I was putting at the beginning of the book to kind of set the stage of the opening of the World's Fair. And then I thought, hold on a second. This is a book about women, mostly for women, and I'm opening it with a quote by FDR that has the word mankind in it. So then I thought, okay, let's bring Eleanor into this. She deserves a spot. And I searched her most famous quotes and found that one. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. And it spoke to me on so many levels. And I think it speaks to a lot of women on a lot of different levels, because I think, unfortunately, a lot of women, and I'm not going to say most because I celebrate the women who have never thought that they can't do things, but I think a lot of women feel, oh, I'm not good enough for that, I'm not skinny enough for that, I'm not smart enough for that, I'm not funny enough for that, I'm not pretty enough for that. And we are all those things, and we can do all the things that we think we cannot do. And so it really was an inspiration to me, and that's why I decided to include it.
Courtney has another question. Okay, you're going to be a professional screenplay writer after this.
Courtney, do you work for Netflix?
Do you think that you would, she says no. Do you think that you would ever write a screenplay and then maybe publish a book about that movie or show afterwards?
Yes, that's actually something very smart. That's actually something that my producing partner and I have been talking about, that for this next thing that I want to write, it really would make a great book, but I could do it in reverse. And so, yes, potentially, we shall see. Yeah. You know, I just want to say one more thing about Eleanor Roosevelt, because for those of you who read the book, you know that there's a character who is speaks about women's issues, and this isn't giving anything away, but she's a made up character. I think her name is Elizabeth. I forget now. I wrote this book so long ago. I don't even remember. Isn't that sad? I don't remember the names of my characters, but her speeches are based on a lot of Eleanor Roosevelt's speeches, what she was talking about women at the time. So this book definitely celebrates Eleanor.
Nina wants to know a little bit more about your research process.
Okay, great, awesome. I'm going to share my screen again because I have some really good pictures that will help.
And just to jump in, Laura C., who's my colleague, said, is it Elizabeth Powell? Was that the last name of?
No.
Okay.
No, and it's not a real person. I made her up. So I started off this research. So as I said, I found out about the book, about the Aquacade, and then I did a deep dive on the internet, on Wikipedia and all of those sorts of things to learn a little bit more. But when I committed to writing the book, I bought a lot of books, including all of these and many more, that had the top one is Billy Rose's autobiography, which is hysterical, written back in the way back. And then I read books about the World's Fair. I read books about the Hollywood studio system, because even though it's a small part of the book about Vivi's experience working in the Hollywood studio system, I wanted to make sure that I got that right with the fixers and with all of the things that they made the female stars do at the time. They controlled their lives. And so I wanted to get that right. Tom Hanks wrote a wonderful short story collection called Uncommon Type, and there's one story in there about the New York World's Fair, and he's a magnificent writer. I also read books about women in journalism, including The Good Girls Revolt by Lynn Povich, and that might sound familiar to some of you because Amazon had a television show called Good Girls Revolt, which is based on this book, and it was wonderful, but they canceled it after one season. And side note, which is interesting, is the man who was in charge of programming for Amazon at the time, who was responsible for canceling the show, ended up getting fired for discrimination against women, for sexual harassment at Amazon. So that show never had, the show about women and feminism and female empowerment never had a chance. I also spent a lot of time on this website, which is the URL for anybody who is interested is 1939nyworldsfair.com. And it is an unbelievably comprehensive website about anything and everything to know about the World's Fair. They have PDFs of brochures and advertisements and menus, in addition to descriptions of every single pavilion that existed, what every country did, copies of Today at the Fair, which was the World's Fair newspaper. It's just incredible. So I spent a lot of time on this before I started writing, and actually as I was writing, if I wanted to know, well, how tall was the triathlon, or how, what was the name of the restaurant in the Japanese pavilion, that sort of thing. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. So the one on the left is a screenshot from the Philip Medicus collection. Philip Medicus was an amateur videographer. So he has, I think there's 17 or 19 reels, and there's no sound. And it's just, you get to see all the different exhibits, the different shows. He has videos of the Aquacade performances, people just walking through the fair, so you could see what people were wearing and what they were eating. And it's just really wonderful as a slice of life, people watching sort of thing. And then on the right is a screenshot from a promotional film that Westinghouse produced called The Middleton Family at the New York World's Fair. And they created a fictional family from a typical American family, and they had them visit the fair and focus obviously on all of Westinghouse's exhibits. I bought a lot of memorabilia off of eBay so that I could hold and smell and see the different things, including all these postcards, and some of them were filled out, and that was really fun to read what people wrote home to their friends and family. I collected these different pieces of costume jewelry, and I bought all of these when I thought that I was going to have live events on my book tour, and I was going to show these off in a little exhibition everywhere that I went, but unfortunately they're all sitting in this little box right now in my office. I have the official guidebook from the World's Fair, so in addition to reading newspaper articles and websites about the fair, I was able to read from the horse's mouth how exactly they were promoting the fair. And one thing I haven't even talked about is, in my research, I found out that there was a newspaper printed at the fair every single day called Today at the Fair. And when I found that out, it helped me justify and create my character of Max, who was a journalist. It gave her somewhere to work. There was an actual newspaper. And I've read multiple copies of this newspaper. I actually own these two. I bought them off of eBay. So I have the actual newspapers that are yellow and cracked, and was able to read the articles and see how they were talking about the fair and what Max's job actually would have been, the sections that she would have worked on. I also from eBay got the program from the Aquacade and was able to read all about that. This was the most popular souvenir at the fair. It was the Heinz Pickle Pin. And the one on the right is an actual, I have it here in plastic, this is an actual pickle pin. And then I also bought these little reproductions, but Heinz used this pin. And as you can see, it's like the size of a thumbnail in a way. They used this for a lot of their different promotional events, but it was a really big deal. People would rush to the Heinz Dome, it was called. Their pavilion was the Heinz Dome, to get a free pickle pin. And then the most exciting part of my research, as I mentioned, the fair grounds still exist. The footprint is exactly the same. So I was able to go on a tour with this nice man who you can see. He's a professional tour guide of the World's Fairgrounds, and he took me on a tour and showed me all of the things that exist from 1939, which are as small as this Elsie from Borden cow. Borden had a pavilion in the food zone. That's a mosaic sewer cover on the bottom left. That's a frieze that says Aquacade, which is now on a snack shop. And on the top left, that's the lake that the Aquacade building abutted. So that was really neat that I was able to walk from where Vivi would have walked to see Max, or walked where all of the millions of people who attended the World's Fair walked. So that was the bulk of my research. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone, if anyone has any more questions to put into the chat, we'll be wrapping up in a few minutes. I would like to encourage you again to check out Reads and Company. They are our official booksellers, and you can buy this new book. Thank you, Amanda. She just put it in the chat again for me. And also, I encourage you to read The Subway Girls, because I particularly liked that book. I believe that came out in 2018.
Yes, thank you. And there's little Easter eggs in all my books. I put something in the subsequent book that refers to the book before it for readers who are
glad your other two then.
Yeah,
because I haven't read the other two. But I really enjoyed talking to you tonight, and I did find out that Susie lives in the town where I went to college, so we kind of bonded over that a little bit. And she also told us earlier that her father went to F&M, so she's got a little bit of a, more of a southeastern Pennsylvania connection.
Yep, I was born in Abington.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it was great to meet you, and hopefully we will see you in I don't know, on Netflix, or if
Oh,
you'll
let's
come
hope.
to our community in the future, we'd love it. I would like to thank everyone for joining us, and our next program actually is in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, which happens this month. And we are going to have a program with the Blue Dove Foundation. Some psychologists will be joining us on May 13th, next Thursday at 7 o'clock. And it's being moderated by my husband. So we're keeping it all in the family with the free moderators here for Literatour Berks. But Susie, thank you so much. You've added a lot. One question, is the book available on audiobook?
Oh yeah, it is.
Okay.
And there's actually 3 actors, two different women, one reads Vivi, one reads Max, and then there's a man who reads
James.
like the newspaper articles and stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
And thank you all so much for coming. It's so nice. I know everybody's burned out from Zoom, so I appreciate your showing up and supporting authors. And also, Amazon reviews really don't buy your book from Amazon, buy it from an independent bookseller, but Amazon reviews really help authors. So.
Yes, you're right. So thank you, and stay healthy, and we hope to see you in person.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.